My name is Ryan Mitchell, and until 3 months ago, I thought I knew exactly what my life was: predictable, modest, and centered around two things I loved: fixing cars and my wife Vanessa. I owned a small auto repair shop called Mitchell's Motors in Denver, Colorado, the kind of place where locals brought their beat-up trucks and family sedans for honest work at fair prices. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Vanessa and I had been married for 5 years. She worked as a sales manager at Pinnacle Pharmaceuticals, a mid-sized company downtown that specialized in generic medications. When we first met at a mutual friend's barbecue, she seemed charmed by my grease-stained hands and genuine smile. "Finally, a man who works with his hands and isn't afraid to get dirty," she had said, laughing as I tried to clean motor oil from under my fingernails. But people change, and somewhere along the way, Vanessa's appreciation for my blue-collar authenticity turned into embarrassment. It started subtly. She'd make little comments about how her friends' husbands were doctors, lawyers, financial advisors. "People with real careers," she'd say, not realizing how deeply those words cut. The first real sign of trouble came 6 months ago during her company's annual Christmas party. I had closed the shop early, showered, and put on my best suit, the one I'd worn to our wedding. When I arrived at the fancy hotel ballroom, Vanessa barely acknowledged me. She introduced me to her colleagues as simply my husband Ryan, without mentioning what I did for work. When someone asked about my profession, she quickly changed the subject. That night, driving home in my 2018 Ford pickup, reliable, practical, but apparently not impressive enough, Vanessa finally exploded. "Do you know how embarrassing it is when Linda's husband talks about his latest surgery, and I have to stand there knowing my husband fixes cars for a living?" "There's nothing wrong with honest work," I replied, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Honest work doesn't pay for designer handbags or European vacations, Ryan. I'm 32 years old, and I want more than this ordinary life." That conversation should have been our wake-up call to seek counseling or have a deeper discussion about our future. Instead, it marked the beginning of the end. Over the following months, Vanessa became distant. She started working late more frequently, claiming big projects and important client meetings. She bought new clothes, expensive outfits that seemed more suited for impressing someone than for her usual office environment. Her phone, which used to lie casually around the house, became permanently attached to her hand, screen side down. The changes were subtle but consistent. She stopped asking about my day, stopped bringing me lunch at the shop like she used to, stopped talking about weekend plans or future dreams. Our conversations became purely functional: bills, household maintenance, logistics. The warmth that had defined our early relationship was replaced by polite coexistence. Then came the phone call that started unraveling everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late February. I was under the hood of Mrs. Patterson's Honda Civic, replacing worn brake pads, when my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed Vanessa's number, which was unusual since she rarely called during work hours. "Hey honey, what's up?" I answered, wiping my hands on a rag. There was a pause, then a man's voice. "Oh sorry, wrong number." The line went dead. My stomach dropped. I immediately called Vanessa back. It rang 4 times before she answered, sounding slightly out of breath. "Ryan, what's wrong? You never call me at work. Someone just called me from your phone. A man. He said wrong number and hung up." Another pause. "Oh, that was probably Blake from my department. He must have grabbed my phone by mistake when we were in the conference room. You know how similar all these phones look?" Blake. She had mentioned him before, but only in passing. Her department head, recently transferred from the company's Chicago office. Divorced, apparently charming, and according to office gossip, quite successful. Why would he be using your phone? "Ryan, you're being paranoid." We were reviewing sales reports, and phones were scattered across the table. "It happens." But something in her tone, too casual, too rehearsed, set off alarm bells in my head. That evening, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I looked through Vanessa's phone while she showered. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages. Most were mundane: grocery reminders, scheduling notes, conversations with her sister. But then I found the thread with Blake. The messages went back 3 months. They started professionally enough: work discussions, meeting confirmations. But gradually they became more personal. Compliments about her presentations. Comments about working late together. Then, buried in the middle of what appeared to be a casual conversation about quarterly targets, I found it. "Blake, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. Vanessa, I know we have to be careful, but but I've never felt this way before. Blake, your husband has no idea how lucky he is. Too bad he's too busy with his little garage to appreciate what he has. Vanessa, don't call it a garage. But you're right, he doesn't understand me like you do. The messages continued, each one feeling like a physical blow. They had been seeing each other for 3 months. 3 months of lies, of her coming home late, and kissing me goodnight with lips that had been on another man. 3 months of me working extra hours at the shop to save money for a vacation surprise I was planning for our 6th wedding anniversary. I set the phone down with trembling hands and sat on our bed, the bed where apparently my wife had been planning her exit from our marriage while I slept beside her, trusting and oblivious. The shower was still running. I could hear Vanessa humming softly, probably thinking about him. The sound that used to make me smile now made me nauseous. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to process the betrayal. Part of me wanted to wake her up, to have it out right there. But a larger part needed time to think, to plan, to decide what came next. The following weeks were torture. I had to act normal, while knowing everything was a lie. Vanessa continued her routine, work, late nights, weekend conferences, that I now realized were romantic getaways. She'd come home with elaborate stories about client presentations and team-building exercises, each lie delivered with the same casual confidence that had once made me trust her completely. I threw myself into work, staying at the shop until late, taking on extra projects. My employees, Jimmy, a kid fresh out of technical school, and Carlos, a veteran mechanic who'd been with me since I opened, noticed my mood but didn't pry. Good employees understand when the boss needs space. It was during one of these late nights, about 3 weeks after discovering the messages, that everything changed again. I was organizing paperwork in my office when I came across a box I'd inherited from my grandfather Walter 5 years earlier. I'd never thoroughly gone through its contents, just old tools, some technical manuals, and what appeared to be business documents from his small repair shop in Nebraska. Grandpa Walter had been my inspiration for becoming a mechanic. He'd taught me everything about engines, about the satisfaction of diagnosing problems and making things work again. He died when I was 25, leaving me his tools and this mysterious box of papers that I'd always meant to examine properly. That night, with nothing but time and heartache on my hands, I finally opened it completely. Most of the contents were what I expected: receipts, old business licenses, correspondence with parts suppliers. But at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth and protected by a metal tube, I found something extraordinary. A complete set of patent documents dated 1974. High-temperature resistant metallic alloy for automotive applications, read the title. The patent holder was listed as Walter R. Mitchell, my grandfather. I spread the documents across my desk under the bright fluorescent lights. The technical specifications were complex, filled with chemical formulas and engineering diagrams that were beyond my expertise. But the basic concept was clear. Grandpa Walter had developed a special metal alloy that could withstand extreme heat while maintaining flexibility and strength. According to the documentation, he'd tried to sell the patent to major automotive manufacturers in the 1970s. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, he'd pitched them all. But the technology was ahead of its time. The industry wasn't ready for such innovation, and the patent had expired worthless, or so everyone thought. I sat back in my chair, studying the yellowed papers. Why had Grandpa Walter kept all this documentation if the patent was worthless? There had to be more to the story. The next morning, I called in sick to work, something I'd never done unless I was genuinely ill, and drove to the Denver Public Library. I spent hours researching patent law, metallurgy, and current automotive technology trends. What I discovered made my heart race. The electric vehicle revolution had created demand for exactly the kind of alloy my grandfather had invented 50 years ago. Modern electric motors generated enormous heat and required materials that could withstand those temperatures while remaining lightweight and durable. Several current patents referenced similar compounds, but none had the specific combination of properties that Walter's formula achieved. More importantly, I learned something crucial about patent law. If a patent had been filed but never properly exploited due to technological limitations, and if the original invention became relevant again, the patent holder's heirs could petition for renewal under specific circumstances, especially if they could demonstrate that the technology was now viable and in demand. I spent the next 2 weeks consulting with patent attorneys, metallurgical engineers, and automotive industry experts. The consensus was unanimous. Walter's alloy was not only relevant but revolutionary for current electric vehicle technology. The formula was elegant, the production process was relatively simple, and most importantly, no one else held a patent for this specific compound. The renewal process would take months, but the preliminary assessments were incredibly promising. One consultant from Detroit estimated that the patent could be worth anywhere from $10 to $50 million, depending on licensing agreements with major manufacturers. $50 million. I sat in my truck outside the patent attorney's office, staring at the preliminary valuation report, barely able to process the numbers. My grandfather, the humble mechanic from Nebraska whom everyone thought was just a dreamer, had potentially made our family wealthy beyond imagination. But there was a problem, Vanessa. Under Colorado's marital property laws, any assets acquired during marriage were subject to division in divorce proceedings. If I pursued the patent renewal while still married, Vanessa would be entitled to half of everything. The woman who was betraying me, who thought my work was embarrassing, who was planning to leave me for her successful boyfriend, would become a multimillionaire because of my grandfather's genius. The irony was almost too bitter to contemplate. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting Vanessa about her affair, I would wait. I would let her think she was in control, let her believe she was trading up for a better life. And when she finally worked up the courage to ask for a divorce, I would give her exactly what she wanted, but on my terms. The next 6 weeks were the most challenging of my life. I had to maintain the pretense of our failing marriage while secretly working with attorneys and industry experts to position myself for the patent renewal. I opened new bank accounts, established business entities, and began the complex legal process of claiming my inheritance. Meanwhile, Vanessa's affair intensified. She started staying out until after midnight, claiming work emergencies that became increasingly implausible. She bought new lingerie that she certainly wasn't wearing for me. She became careless with her phone, leaving it unlocked while she showered or cooked dinner. I could have gathered enough evidence to destroy her in divorce court, but that wasn't my goal. I wanted something more elegant, more fitting. I wanted her to destroy herself. The opportunity came on a rainy Thursday evening in early May. I was working late at the shop, finalizing the patent renewal application, when Vanessa called. "Ryan, I'm going to be very late tonight. We're having a crisis with the Henderson account, and the whole team needs to stay until we resolve it." "How late?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Probably after midnight." "Don't wait up." Of course. Blake's divorce had been finalized the previous week, according to the office gossip that Vanessa unknowingly shared. Tonight was probably their celebration. I hung up and looked around my shop, my life's work that Vanessa found so embarrassing. The irony wasn't lost on me that this humble garage was about to become the headquarters for a multi-million-dollar patent licensing operation. At 11:30 p.m., I decided to drive home early. Not to catch them, I already knew what I would find, but because I wanted to see Vanessa's reaction when her two worlds collided. Sure enough, Blake's silver BMW was parked in my driveway. I sat in my truck for a moment, engine running, considering my options. I could walk in and confront them, create a scene, demand explanations and apologies. Or I could be strategic. I chose strategy. I pulled out my phone and called Vanessa. It rang 4 times before she answered, sounding breathless and annoyed. "Ryan, what's wrong? I told you I'd be late." "I know, honey. I just wanted to let you know that I'm coming down with something. Probably that flu bug that's been going around the shop. I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight, so I don't get you sick." "Oh, okay. That's probably smart. I'll try to be quiet when I get home." "Take your time. Rest is the best medicine, right?" After hanging up, I drove to a 24-hour diner on the other side of town, where I spent the next 3 hours drinking coffee and finalizing my patent strategy with my attorney via encrypted email. By the time I returned home at 3 a.m., Blake's car was gone, and Vanessa was asleep in our bed, probably dreaming about her bright future with her successful boyfriend. If only she knew. The patent renewal was approved on a Friday afternoon in late May. I was in my office when the call came from my attorney in Washington, D.C. "Ryan, I have extraordinary news. Not only has the patent been renewed, but I've been contacted by representatives from Tesla, Ford, General Motors, and 3 European manufacturers. They're all interested in licensing agreements." My hand shook as I gripped the phone. "How interested?" "Very. Tesla alone is prepared to offer a $20 million upfront payment for exclusive rights, plus royalties on every vehicle produced using the alloy. But I think we can do better if we negotiate non-exclusive licensing with multiple manufacturers. $20 million. As an opening offer. There's more, my attorney continued. Ford has offered you a position as senior technology consultant. Base salary of $600,000 per year, plus bonuses tied to implementation milestones. They want you to relocate to Detroit and oversee the integration of your grandfather's technology into their next-generation electric vehicle platform. I hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence. In the space of 6 months, I had gone from being a small-town mechanic whose wife was ashamed of him to being courted by the biggest names in the automotive industry. But the best part was still to come. That evening, I drove home with a briefcase full of contracts, patents, and financial projections. Vanessa's car was already in the driveway, and I could see lights on in the kitchen. She was probably preparing one of her elaborate lies about why she'd been so busy lately. I found her at the kitchen table, laptop open, apparently working on a presentation. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, I saw something different in her expression. Not guilt exactly, but determination. The look of someone who had made a decision. Ryan, we need to talk. Here it comes, I thought. The conversation I'd been waiting for, the moment when my wife of 5 years would finally reveal her true feelings and ask for the divorce that would set us both free. Sure, I said, setting my briefcase by the door. What's on your mind? She closed the laptop and folded her hands on the table. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about our marriage, about our future together. And I don't think we're happy anymore. We've grown apart, become different people with different goals. I think we both know that. I sat down across from her, maintaining a neutral expression. Go on. I think we should get divorced. There it was. The words I'd been expecting for weeks, delivered with the clinical precision of someone who'd rehearsed this speech multiple times. I see. And you've thought this through completely? Yes. I've already spoken with an attorney. I know this is difficult, but I think it's best for both of us. We can have a clean, amicable split and move on with our lives. I nodded thoughtfully. What kind of terms are you thinking? She reached into a folder beside her laptop and pulled out a thick stack of papers. I've had divorce papers prepared. The terms are fair. We split the house equity, divide our savings, and I'm asking for temporary spousal support while I transition to living on my own salary. I accepted the papers and began reading through them. The terms were exactly what I'd expected. She wanted half of everything, plus monthly payments of $2,500 for 3 years. On paper, it looked reasonable. In reality, she was asking me to fund her new life with Blake while walking away with everything we'd built together. This seems thorough, I said, continuing to read. You've really thought of everything. I wanted to be fair, Ryan. I know this isn't easy, but dragging it out won't help either of us. I set the papers down and looked at her directly. Can I ask you something, Vanessa? Is there someone else? For just a moment, her composure slipped. I saw a flash of panic in her eyes before she recovered. This isn't about anyone else, Ryan. This is about us, about the fact that we're not right for each other anymore. But there is someone else. She stood up abruptly, walking to the kitchen window. What does it matter? Our marriage has been over for months. We both know that. I suppose it doesn't matter, I agreed. But I am curious about one thing. This attorney you consulted, did you tell him about my financial situation? About the shop's earnings, our assets, everything? Of course. That's how these things work. And he based his recommendations on the information you provided? Yes, Ryan. Why are you asking these questions? Are you going to fight the divorce? I stood up and walked to my briefcase by the door. Not at all, Vanessa. In fact, I think divorce is exactly what we both need. I returned to the table with several folders from my briefcase. But there are a few things your attorney might not have known when he prepared these papers. Things that might significantly change the terms he recommended. Vanessa turned from the window, looking confused. What are you talking about? 3 months ago, I inherited something from my grandfather. Something I didn't know existed until recently. I opened the first folder and spread the patent documents across the table. Grandpa Walter wasn't just a mechanic, Vanessa. He was an inventor. In 1974, he developed and patented a revolutionary metal alloy for automotive applications. The technology was ahead of its time, so the patent was never exploited. But with the electric vehicle revolution, his invention has become incredibly valuable. She moved closer to the table, staring at the official documents. Last month, I successfully renewed the patent. This week, I received licensing offers from Tesla, Ford, General Motors, and several European manufacturers. I opened the second folder, revealing contracts and financial projections. Tesla's opening offer was $20 million for exclusive rights. Ford has offered $25 million for a non-exclusive license, plus a consulting position with a base salary of $600,000 per year. Vanessa's face went white. You're joking. I'm not. But here's the interesting part, and the reason your attorney's recommendations might need some revision. I opened the third folder, containing the inheritance documentation and legal opinions. The patent was filed in 1974, long before our marriage. Under Colorado law, it's classified as separate property, not marital property. That means in a divorce, you have no claim to it whatsoever. She sank into her chair, staring at the documents as if they might disappear. Furthermore, the consulting position I've accepted requires me to relocate to Detroit next month. I'll be selling this house and the shop, but since both were purchased with my separate property earnings before I knew about the patent, they're also not subject to division. Wait, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What does this mean? It means, Vanessa, that if you proceed with this divorce, which I think you should, you'll receive exactly what you brought into the marriage. Your personal belongings, your car, and your savings account, which I believe currently contains about $1,800. The color drained completely from her face. You're telling me that you're worth millions of dollars, and I get nothing? I'm telling you that the law is the law. You're asking for a divorce based on irreconcilable differences, which means no fault on either side. In a no-fault divorce, separate property remains separate. She stood up shakily, pacing around the kitchen. This can't be legal. There has to be something. I've consulted with 3 different attorneys, Vanessa. They all confirm the same thing. If you had filed for divorce citing adultery, things might be different. But since you're claiming no fault, adultery? She spun around to face me. What are you talking about? Blake Richardson, your department head. You've been having an affair with him for 3 months. The accusation hung in the air between us. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, try to salvage some dignity from the situation. Instead, she collapsed back into her chair, all pretense finally gone. How long have you known? Long enough. Long enough to understand why you really want this divorce, and long enough to prepare accordingly. Ryan, listen to me. I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling, we can... No, Vanessa. We can't. You were right the first time. We should get divorced. I'll sign your papers tonight. I picked up a pen and began signing the divorce documents, right there at our kitchen table. But Ryan, if you forgive me, if we stay married, we could have everything together. $25 million. We could travel the world, buy a mansion, anything we want. We could have had that conversation 3 months ago, before you decided that your mechanic husband wasn't good enough for you. I finished signing and pushed the papers back across the table. Besides, there's one more thing you should know about Blake Richardson. She looked up at me with desperate eyes. I had him investigated. Professional courtesy, since he's been sleeping with my wife in my house. I pulled out one final folder. Blake's been married twice before. Both marriages ended when his wives discovered he was embezzling from his employers to fund his lifestyle. He's currently under investigation by Pinnacle Pharmaceuticals for irregularities in his expense accounts. He'll probably be fired within the month, possibly facing criminal charges. Vanessa stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. The BMW he drives? Leased. The expensive restaurant dinners? Company credit card? The weekend getaways? All charged to fictitious business conferences. I stood up and gathered my folders. Your successful boyfriend, the man you thought was going to give you a better life, is a fraud who's about to lose everything. And you threw away a marriage to a man who was about to become very wealthy for that. That night, I slept in the guest room for the last time. The next morning, Vanessa was gone when I woke up. Her car was still in the driveway, but she'd apparently called someone for a ride. Probably Blake, assuming he still had a job to go to. She left a note on the kitchen table. I'm staying with my sister for a few days. Please give me some space to process everything. Space was exactly what I intended to give her. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. True to my word, Vanessa received no alimony, no property settlement, no claim to my future earnings. She kept her personal belongings, her savings account, and her 2-year-old Honda Civic. Everything else belonged to me. Blake Richardson was terminated from Pinnacle Pharmaceuticals the same week our divorce became final. The internal investigation had revealed systematic expense account fraud totaling over $40,000. He avoided criminal prosecution by agreeing to make full restitution, but his career in pharmaceutical sales was effectively over. Vanessa tried to contact me several times during the transition period, but I'd already moved to Detroit and started my new position with Ford. My Denver house sold for twice what I'd expected. Apparently, the local real estate market had improved significantly. The shop sold to Carlos and Jimmy, who'd managed to secure financing through a small business loan. They kept the name Mitchell's Motors, which made me proud. My new life in Detroit was everything I hadn't expected. The Ford consulting position was challenging and rewarding, involving me in cutting-edge technology development that would literally help shape the future of transportation. The licensing agreements for Grandpa Walter's alloy were structured to provide steady royalty income for decades to come. Within 6 months, I was financially secure beyond anything I'd imagined possible for a small-town mechanic. But the most satisfying part wasn't the money or the career advancement. It was the knowledge that I'd handled the betrayal with dignity and intelligence, turning my wife's greed and infidelity against her in the most elegant way possible. About a year after the divorce, I ran into Linda Morrison at a Ford Company event in Chicago. Linda was one of Vanessa's former colleagues, married to a successful surgeon. She seemed surprised to see me dressed in an expensive suit, mingling with automotive industry executives. "Ryan, my goodness, I almost didn't recognize you. What are you doing here?" I explained my position with Ford, my consulting work, and the patent licensing business I'd developed. Linda listened with growing amazement. "This is incredible. Do you know what happened to Vanessa after your divorce?" I didn't, and I told her honestly that I hadn't kept track of my ex-wife's situation. She had to move back in with her parents in Aurora. Lost her job at Pinnacle when the whole Blake Richardson scandal came out. Apparently, upper management felt she'd shown poor judgment in her association with him. She's working retail now, at one of those department stores in the mall. Linda paused, studying my reaction. "She asks about you sometimes, you know. I think she realizes what a mistake she made. I hope she finds happiness," I said, and I meant it. Everyone deserves a second chance at building a good life. But as I drove back to my suburban Detroit home that evening, a beautiful colonial on 2 acres with a 3-car garage where I kept my restored 1967 Mustang, my new Tesla Model S, and my Ford F-150 Lightning prototype, I reflected on how differently things had turned out than either Vanessa or I had expected. She had seen a mechanic with dirty hands and modest ambitions, someone beneath her social aspirations. She had traded our marriage for what she thought was a chance at wealth and status, only to discover that appearances can be deceiving and that betrayal often carries its own punishment. I had discovered that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as inheritance from a grandfather who died thinking his dreams had failed, and that patience and strategic thinking can be more powerful than anger or revenge. The patent business continued to grow. Within 2 years, I was licensing Walter's alloy technology to manufacturers in 12 countries. The royalty checks alone provided more income than my Denver shop had generated in its best years. I established the Walter Mitchell Foundation, which provided scholarships for young people pursuing technical education, particularly in automotive and mechanical fields. I never remarried, though I had several meaningful relationships. The experience with Vanessa had taught me valuable lessons about trust, compatibility, and the importance of shared values over superficial attraction. Sometimes, late at night in my study, I would look at the framed patent document hanging on my wall, Grandpa Walter's legacy that had changed everything. I wondered if he had any idea, when he filed those papers in 1974, that 50 years later they would transform his grandson's life in ways he could never have imagined. The mechanic's granddaughter, who'd been ashamed of blue-collar work, had lost everything. The mechanic who'd been deemed unworthy had gained more than he'd ever dreamed possible. But perhaps the most important lesson was simpler than all the legal strategies and business dealings. Integrity matters, betrayal has consequences, and sometimes the person others underestimate is the one who ends up winning in the end. The last time I heard anything about Vanessa was 3 years after our divorce. She had remarried, a middle manager at an insurance company, someone with steady employment and modest ambitions. According to the social media post that a mutual acquaintance showed me, she seemed happy enough, posing with her new husband in front of a small ranch house in a suburban development. I was genuinely glad for her. Everyone deserves happiness, and everyone deserves love. But I couldn't help noting the irony. She had ended up with exactly the kind of ordinary, middle-class life she'd been trying to escape when she left me. Meanwhile, I was living a life that exceeded both our original dreams, built on the foundation of a grandfather's forgotten genius and my own determination to turn betrayal into opportunity. As I finished writing this story, 5 years after that night when Vanessa presented me with divorce papers while laughing at my embarrassing career, I realized that the greatest revenge isn't anger or cruelty. It's living well, achieving success on your own terms, and proving that those who underestimate you do so at their own peril. The mechanic had the last laugh after all. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video, there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.